So I will give some perspective on what is changing on the DSO's landscape, threat landscape, on security and data protection, and how the upcoming policy, and Eva already referred the GDPR, how they will impact and affect our strategy in terms of security and data protection within the company. So my name is Nuno Medeiros. I work for EDP Distribuição, which is the DSO company from the EDP group. So to start up with, society is highly dependent on a number of critical services or critical infrastructures. Just to name a few, of course, energy, electricity, water, transportations, food, telecommunications now are also critical infrastructures, as we have so many other services that are dependent on telecommunications. And this is where EDP stands, of course, in the energy sector, and my company specifically, as a DSO, having the scope within Portugal on the low voltage, medium voltage, and high voltage concessions for the planning, operation, and maintaining of the power grid. We have about 6 million customers. And what I also think about the electricity critical infrastructure is that it clearly stands out from the remaining. And this picture here is from a Dutch report, shows exactly what I mean, is that there is a clear direct impact if we don't have electricity. So we lost one of our most important services that we need, to keep our comfort, to keep our way of living. But then there is also an indirect impact on people's lives because of the other critical infrastructures that are also dependent on electricity to work. So this is why I think that there's a huge responsibility on companies such as EDP to make sure that they do the right thing and somehow prevent a disruption of their service to have a bad impact in society. So this is our mission, besides exploring and maintaining this power grid. And what is happening, or what has been happening over the past 20 to 30 years, is what we call the power grid digitalization process. And the digitalization process can be described as the usage, the application of digital infrastructure to support our physical operations, because in the end, the power grid is a physical infrastructure. But now, not so much. We have the physical infrastructure and we have a parallel digital infrastructure that we rely on to make sure that we provide the best service to society. And this digital infrastructure has been implemented over the few years at the first stage, 30 years ago maybe, to make sure that we could deliver the best quality of service or reduce our operation costs, so become more efficient, because that has a direct impact on the cost that people pay for electricity. So we started by doing that first stage by implementing automation and remote control capabilities at our facilities. So that was the first stage, and now we went into a complete different paradigm where we have to implement a whole new set of technologies that will support our operations, daily operations, due to society challenges, or in some cases demands from our consumers, for example. So just to give a brief example, because I also described a few of those yesterday, we have microgeneration, distributed energy resources. We have a customer that wants to be more efficient. We have a European Union who wants to be more efficient. So everything's changing and we need to adapt. We need to somehow be able to encompass those objectives in our more classical and core business processes that we had. And for that, we rely on technology. All of these we can only do by supporting our operations in technology, new technology. The good thing is that, of course, this technology will help us achieve that goal. But then there's the other side, and the other side is that we are increasing our risks by implementing, by developing this new environment, technological environment that is subject, of course, to cyber threats and also some data protection threats that I will talk immediately next. So, what is our worst fear as a DSO? Is blackouts. It has always been blackouts, and to prevent blackouts, one of the things we did has been to implement technology, to implement ways of being able to more efficiently understand or detect a blackout in our infrastructure, and of course recover from it. And now we have a whole new scenario because we did this digitalization process to make sure that we could prevent blackouts or be faster on solving them. But then we can also have now blackouts if we don't take care or if we don't prevent the cyber threats related to the implementation of this digital infrastructure. So we've done something to make sure that we could reduce our blackouts, but now we are or might be subject to blackouts that were caused due to cyber attacks. So it's a whole new concept that we need to understand, and of course our strategy as a company should now be more open to these new threats, not so conventional for a DSO, and do the proper investments and the proper engagement to make sure that we can prevent this from happening. And of course, we've heard about this, but it's never too much to focus on what happened in Ukraine in 2015 and now also in 2016, is that there have been physical incidents that were caused by cyber attacks, by successful cyber attacks on DSOs and TSOs. So this has happened, and this is the reality. We need to make sure that our digital infrastructure, or that throughout our digitalization process, we do the right things to prevent blackouts being caused by cyber attacks. And so, as I was saying, this makes cybersecurity a very important thing now. We have had for many years a strategy to make sure that we could address our physical incidents, but now we also need to be able to address our cyber incidents. So, but we have some challenge on companies as classical and as heavy as DSOs, and that's the fact that it's not clearly cybersecurity is not our business as usual. So this is not our DNA. It typically is not a C-level topic. And they don't really understand the risks related to this digitalization process, so the cyber risks related to this digitalization process, so we need to somehow make them more aware. There's also a lack of harmonization. So what should we do to prevent cyber attacks to have an impact on the power grid? What are the strategy, or what should be the strategy? The EU framework is still missing, so the EU has been doing some work in defining some guidelines or best practices to make sure that while we implement smart grids, we made it with security in mind and data protection in mind, but still there's not a clear way to follow for big utilities, small utilities, and of course we need to consider that it's on Europe there's a huge number of DSOs that should be addressing the topic the same way, with the same concerns and the same effort. And we also have the regulatory environment, and this is a great challenge because cybersecurity is, of course, not only related to, but also to investments. We need to spend money on cybersecurity. Things become more expensive if you think about security, or if you have, if you require security as a default. So we need to face all these challenges and not doing it individually. So this will never be an individual effort. Even if EDP, for example, is doing a great job, the TSO in Portugal might not be doing a great job, or the opposite, of course. So, and we know as a power grid, we are connected to all different power grids. So not only the TSO, but in some countries we have 600 DSOs. So they are all connected and they can all have an impact on each other. So it shouldn't be, again, an individual effort. It should be something that should be highlighted in each DSO business as something that they need to do. And just to pinpoint why I'm focusing now on the dependency there is between the different DSOs and the DSOs and TSOs, is that we know that in 2006 we had this German-triggered incident that had an impact on many southern European countries. So the fact is that if there is a big enough physical incident caused by a cyber attack, it will have an impact on other organizations or on other companies. And this means that we should all be aligned. We should all know what we should do, and we should be doing it. So what I believe is that this clearly calls for a common goal from the European Commission. So the European Commission should somehow guide our efforts and help us all have some strategy in terms of cybersecurity and data protection to make sure that we, of course, are all protected and cooperate with each other to make sure that we can somehow protect the European power grid, because again, we are all connected. And talking now about data protection, and we have heard Eva, so we know that smart grids, they increase and they bring some different risks to the equation, not only security, but also data protection, as we need consumer information to potentiate the capabilities, the features of our smart grid. And this information, this consumer information, this private information is very relevant to make sure that some of these features that we believe that we should be able to deliver, those are the ones that help us that address the challenges that I've referred to at the beginning. So managing the electrical vehicles being connected, managing the fluctuations of microgeneration and distributed energy resources. For this, we need to know what is the consumption everywhere and the generation anywhere, and of course, be able to balance energy coming from one place to the other. And this is something that we clearly need to have a strategy for, data protection, because we have heard all of these, very controversial topics about how we are listening to consumers, how we are trying to find out if they are at home or not at home. But the thing is that the reality is we can do that. We are not doing that, or we don't have maybe the technology now to do it, but the fact is if we do it properly, if we develop these kind of capabilities, we will be able to do that. And data protection comes into the equation because we don't want to do that. We don't need to do that for our business. And that's, let's say, what I feel it's the responsibility of the different DSOs. We have the power to do something, but we don't need it, we don't want to. And this is how the DPIA, for example, and a strategy in terms of data protection can help organizations not doing these things, or at least making sure that they can show people that they are aware of data protection and that they are not taking advantage of having this information that is critical for their most relevant business processes, but not really knowing if someone is at home or not. So we should have data protection in mind and use only this information for the purposes that we should, and we should have technical and organizational measures in place, and the DPIA can, of course, guide this kind of endeavor to make sure that we don't have people saying that about what we are doing with their information. And what is also relevant, and I will try to be a little faster, the European Commission is finally on the way. So we have some effort on their side, and the grid operators are clearly part of this path. We have heard about the GDPR and how the GDPR will consider data controllers and data processors in their scope. So how it will mandate a DPIA to be applied to those business cases or business processes that use somehow potentially private information. So it's clearly what the member states and the organizations needed to make sure that they are all aware of what are the threats and how they should address these threats. So that's what the GDPR does, and the DPIA can be a very powerful tool to make sure that we are addressing data protection issues in the right way. And of course, if we're not, there are very high penalties that we can suffer. So this is a responsibility with society and our customers, but also something that we need to take into consideration as the financial impact in organizations is huge. And about the NIST directive. NIST directive, Network and Information Security Directive, focus is cybersecurity. And what it intends to do is to identify what should be the strategy of a company that, in this sense, is an operator of essential service, so it's a critical infrastructure provider. What it should be doing, so the least it should be doing to make sure that it is protecting these very critical processes that will have an impact in society. And we are talking about risk assessment and analysis methodologies. I'm a bit late, but 2 more minutes. Also, technical and organizational measures that should be taken in place within organizations to make sure that they are looking with a broader scope to security. So this is not something that can be addressed with only technology. And then, because we are aware that we can never protect everything 100%, and this happens, of course, also with the physical infrastructure we have, something will happen. So it's better to have the appropriate capabilities to make sure that we can detect it faster and, solve that or recover from that as fast as possible. And SEGRID project has also been contributing to this overall European policy making and how this European policy making could affect in a positive way organizations in Europe. And we have a specific work package focusing on identifying the existing policies and regulations and analyze if they have or they should be improved somehow to help organizations, DSOs, to be better prepared to the cybersecurity and data protection challenges. So one of the deliverables, the first one was to identify again and assess what would be the gaps that are limiting, the capability of this kind of existing regulation and policy making. And then the second work package that we delivered just 15 days ago, in the end of February, identifies a set of recommendations at a EU level, at a national level, and specifically for DSOs and TSOs, what they should be doing to cover the gaps that the existing legislation and legal grounds of today are not delivering still. So this is something that will be, I think, very relevant in the way that it gives some advice at European level of what is still to be done to help companies and organizations in terms of securing and data protecting their digital infrastructure. So to finish my last slide, what changes and which are the challenges for utilities? I would say that there's still translation needed of the GDPR and the NIS for the energy sector. So there's no question that these are very broad documents, but I believe they will help organizations such as mine to make sure that they are doing the best effort. So this is one of the challenges, translating what there is with a broad scope to a specific sector. And then the role of the regulator, because as I said, we are very dependent on money, on investments, both for data protection and security. Both are not only relying on technology, but people also cost technology. Changing procedures also cost money. Changing procedures, again, also cost money. So we need the regulator to be part of the solution with us. And then compliance versus effectiveness. We have talked about that yesterday. It's not only a compliance issue. Of course, it is also a compliance issue because we have a responsibility to the regulator and to the authorities, being the Data Protection Authority, for example, or even the National Cybersecurity Center. We need to be taking a good look into security and data protection, but we also want to be effective. We also want to make sure that our strategy is aligned with this, because as DSOs, we have to be committed to that. And in my personal opinion, both the GDPR and the NIS are a great competitive advantage, because I've been, for the past 5 years, trying to explain my board and my directors why we need money for cybersecurity and data protection. But now there's a new European legislation that is showing or trying to show how important this topic is and how we should be addressing both security and data protection while we develop our smart grid. Because smart grid is clearly addressing one of the most important challenges of DSOs over the past 50 years, but in the end, we need to do it properly. And this, both the GDPR and the NIS, in my opinion, are tools that people like me can use to be able to show that we should also be addressing, while doing that, should also be addressing other very relevant issues. So thank you for your attention. Sorry for taking a bit more time than I should, and I hope it has been useful for you.